Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Training Industry Leader Talk, Upskilling Employee Technical Skills, sponsored by ComLab India, Guide, Revature, VR Vision, and WhatFix. I'm Avery Vogt, Events Manager at Training Industry, and I'm thrilled that you could all join us today. Before we get started, I'd like to just go over a few housekeeping items to help you interact with our speaker and get the most out of today's program. Throughout today's event, please feel free to use the chat for comments and submit questions in the Q&A panel. All questions will be addressed during the event or at the end of the program during our Q&A section. At the end of the event, you'll also notice a short survey has popped open in your browser, and we'd appreciate your thoughts on today's event. And as always, all of our sessions are being recorded and will be archived on trainingindustry.com, and you'll receive a follow-up email from us with a link to the on-demand sessions. If this is your first Training Industry event, we'd like to welcome you. Training Industry exists to make connections among learning and development professionals. We offer tons of resources to support your role in L&D through live events like today's Leader Talk, as well as through articles on our website, our magazine, conferences, research reports, and our podcast. We would also love to hear what you've learned from today's session on social media, so please follow us on all your favorite platforms and let's continue the conversation. And now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, Roni Cerga. Roni is the CEO of VR Vision, a leading provider of immersive virtual reality training solutions. He specializes in the development of high-impact interactive VR simulations that transform how enterprises train their workforce across industries. With a strong focus on innovation and execution, Roni has led VR Vision through over 200% year-over-year growth, building a world-class team of technologists, designers, and developers. Roni, we are super excited to have you here today. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Avery, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the training industry to having us here today. I'm really excited to be presenting. And to the people watching, we can keep this interactive. I will keep an eye on the questions as well as I go through the presentation. But I'm very excited to share a little bit about our technology, but more importantly, potentially give away some great insights around what has worked and how the technology has evolved over time. And the best way to do that is to see actual examples. So as I speak, I'm going to go through a slide deck, but more importantly, I'll be playing videos that will be showcasing how these customers have used this technology and how it has evolved over time for technical training specifically. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen over here so we can see the presentation. And I'll take over Avery slides. Very good. Let me just make this full screen. Great. So before I jump into the presentation, a little bit about the company. I saw some people from Ontario. Hello. We are Toronto-based, a Canadian company, but we work with some of the most leading companies around the world, from Europe, North America, and even Asia. We've been helping them with technical skills training for about 10 years now. And I'm very excited to share a little bit about this journey and about technical skill training and how that's evolved. Now, the main reason customers use virtual reality for training is that it addresses some very specific challenges that are very difficult to basically resolve otherwise in traditional methods, let's say through video or PowerPoints, and sometimes even through hands-on training. So the biggest one is the cost. A lot of multinational companies find a challenge to have their trainees and trainers meet and collaborate because somebody has to fly overseas, and sometimes they need access to very dangerous or very heavy or very difficult to access equipment. And that with it brings some safety concerns. Another big one is the consistency of learning. We all know every company has amazing trainers, and sometimes they deliver great content, but even the best trainer won't be at the top of their game every single time. So having some virtualized systems allows for us to deliver a high degree of consistent learning. And of course, the retention is a really, really big aspect of all of these. We remember through doing. And virtual reality basically allows us to do that, but in a very safe, simulated environment. And that's where the value of the simulations come from. Now, I think this is the most interesting part. What you'll see in this slide is going to be the progress of simulations from simple point-and-click training with interactive 360 videos. It's going to progress into procedural learning which is more like step-by-step guided and evaluation-based learning. And then we're going to go into the really exciting stuff, which is multiplayer learning. And none of this is going to be very vague. We're going to be very specific. We're going to show actual use cases that vary from, like we mentioned in the heading, from Toyota to Siemens to Coca-Cola. So very excited to show these and their progress. Now, as most of the people here are all training professionals. There's no perfect delivery vehicle for technical training, right? So everything has its strengths and weaknesses. And I'm going to be able to address some of those as we go through this presentation. And hopefully, as we go through it, there'll be some interesting questions that we can answer, and we'll take breaks in between some of these slides as well. So I'm going to share a video. The first one is going to be around Toyota Motor Manufacturing. Funny enough, our very first client. Well, Toyota Motor Manufacturing Canada was our first client, but since then we've expanded into the US, and the example I'll be sharing is from Motor Manufacturing Mississippi. But we work with many, many of their plants and many, many other divisions of the corporation. The reason they started with us was that their big challenge was accessibility. So having people go through the safety learning center through different locations was taking a lot of time, and it was also losing a lot of time in productivity. And the great thing about this type of delivery vehicle is that it's very quick to create. It's relatively low cost, but some of the interactions are limited. So I'm going to play this video for us and talk us through what that looked like. Now, this is common with all applications we go through. The first thing that most companies will do is, of course, they'll have to log in with their company credentials. So that's the first part that they will do. Once they log in, it can be through an employee ID. It could be linked to Microsoft Azure or using their email. They'll get access to their assigned courses. And this is a similar method for both 360, CGI, and multiplayer. But the multiplayer will get a little bit more interesting because we won't just be going through the training, we'll actually be joining shared sessions. Now, the purpose of this training was twofold. It was to educate, and it was also to evaluate competency at the same time without putting employees at risk. As you can see here, giving them the ability to spot the hazards, and they use a laser pointer in VR to point and click whenever they observe some potentially unsafe behavior.
This is a 2-foot rule violation.
And every time they spot it, a call-out will appear to have a little bit of insight around what the hazard was. Now, as we progress, these hazards are only available for a short amount of time, much like they may be in real life. So unless they're quick to spot, then they will miss it. And once the module is completed, a results screen appears that basically gives the employee the ability to see the hazards that they found and the hazards that they missed. And all of this information is also pushed into our analytics dashboards. And high level, it's also tracked through the learning management system. We integrate with any learning management system. In this case, it's using Cornerstone on demand. So if you're noticing with 360 video, if you're being observant, what's happening is that we're really not interacting with tools and equipment, right? We have the ability to click into menus, and those decisions could trigger specific events, but it doesn't really help with procedures, right? It doesn't really teach you how to use the equipment. It doesn't really teach you how to develop specific motor skills or understand the workflows or even collaborate with others. So this is really good for orientation, and it's really good for safety training, but it has some inherent limitations. And I'd say the largest limitation for this type of technology is really the lack of collaboration. So we cannot have a trainer in the scene join us and talk to us as we go through it or collaborate with them. So I'm going to proceed to my next slide, which is Coca-Cola. Now we're getting a little bit more sophisticated in our simulations. Now we're looking at CGI instead of 360 video. And CGI is basically a 3D digital twin of the environment that we can interact with. So again, I'm going to go into the two videos and explain how that functions. Now, in CGI, there are typically, for single player learning, that's the SP over there in the title. I should have made that clearer. But for single player learning, we have the ability to educate, and that's done through giving highlights and voiceovers, and the ability to evaluate. So the same course will be repeated once somebody has learned how to do the work. It'll be repeated to teach them how to even make mistakes. Now, it's great, and it's better than 360 video in the regard that you can reach out and you can interact with the virtual world, and it will function very much like its real-life counterpart, like digital twin. Again, it'll carry over the limitation of its previous showcase. Now, with Coca-Cola, just to give you some insights, where we're seeing this is that they're basically training drivers and technicians on how to do bulk syrup cleaning. This is the back room of restaurants and McDonald's, and it's a very complicated process. I had to repeat it many times myself to learn how to do this kind of work. So I'm going to dig into it, and I know there are some questions, so we'll be looking at these, and if time is permitting, at the end we'll try to address them, because I'll try to cover as much as this is possible. But thank you. Keep writing questions in the chat, and we'll definitely keep an eye on them. So I'm going to hit play once again, and let me maximize this for all of you to see, and let's hit play. So now the first thing that you'll notice is that the 3D objects and models are being highlighted. And there's also closed captioning, and there's a voiceover explaining what the training is going to be about and guiding the user through the training.
Finally, you will use the sanitizing panel and its respective hoses to sanitize tank number 1 with the marked hoses.
So this is what we call guided education.
The sight tube on tank number 1 and confirm that it is near empty. You will see the level.
Now, in guided education, we really can't make any mistakes unless the student goes out of their way to make a mistake, because everything is procedural, right? It's in the title. So we're teaching them the different steps that they have to follow for successful completion of the work.
Remove the dust cap from the syrup fill fitting on tank number 2.
Now, every step that they're being told is guided. There's two things happening. There's a voiceover telling them what to do, and there's a visual highlight. When they interact with a also have
Grab the jumper hose hanging on the panel
interface explaining how they shouldn't interact with it, because not everybody knows how to use VR, right? So this makes it a little bit easier for new users to pick up the technology and go through the workflows. Now, everything is a photorealistic.
The dust cap from the 3/4-inch jumper hose connector, the larger of the two, and connect it to the syrup fill fitting at the top of the tank number 2.
Much a copy of its real-life counterpart.
Connect the vent line to the pressure fitting, also on top of tank number 2.
Notice again, we're explaining exactly which hose to use and where to attach it. Now I'm going to fast forward. This gives you a sense of how your education functions. If I minimize this and I go back into my presentation, I will very briefly show how evaluation differs from education.
Process of sanitizing the hybrid bulk syrup container. First, check if there's any remaining syrup in the tank.
I struggled with this, to be very honest with all of you.
Transfer it to another container and proceed to prepare the container and sanitizing solution. And finally, sanitize the tank.
To learn how to do it. Now, the little circle you see there happening, that's called a visual inspection. And this is universal in almost every app that we do, from local tagouts to safety. Basically, we're seeing the gaze of the user, and we're giving this visual context to make sure that they're properly looking at the right thing at the right time. But notice there's no more voiceovers, there's no more visual highlights guiding us. But what's most important, and I don't think it's in this recording, is that now the trainees can make mistakes. So if they take this hose, for example, and they try to plug it into the incorrect tank, that's something that we're going to know a mistake is going to appear. And how we address that will differ depending on how the clients want that workflow to play out. But typically, a notification is given, and then they either have to repeat the process or they have to start from a more recent checkpoint. Now, I'm going to open up the questions here a little bit and see if I can address some of them as we go through this. So the question is around the headsets. It seems to be the biggest question I'm noticing here. So these work with any type of standalone VR headset, whether it is a Pico or Quest 3. We prefer to use the latest in terms of chipset, guys. So as long as it has the latest XR2 plus chipset, then that's the ideal one. As for the volume of the videos, I'm keeping it low on purpose so I can speak on top of it. But all of these videos will be provided for all of you to view after the presentation. So don't worry about it. And you can hear the video quality clearer there. And everything is tetherless. So yes, everything is running standalone. There's no need for any computers or any type of processing power beyond what the headset can provide. That's actually something we're proud of because our 3D artist team is extremely talented, that they can optimize some really larger complex environments and digital twins to function in standalone VR, much like they would in real life. So I'm going to minimize the chat for now, and if more questions pop up, I'll be happy to check it back again. So again, we saw kind of like tremendous value with this type of training, right? Because employees are able to get hands-on without interrupting workflows for their customer in this case, right? Which is restaurants and fast food. The second great value about it is that there's no fluids being wasted. There's no mistake. The mistakes are not costly, so there's no material usage. And the best thing about it is that they don't have to travel somewhere to get access to this type of equipment to be trained. As long as they have a headset, they can train on it. But what are the limits to this, right? Like, what are the drawbacks? So this is, we can talk about the great things about it. I guess the biggest one is that all these steps and even the mistakes have been pre-programmed, right? So that makes it for a little bit of a rigid training experience because you cannot account for everything. And as we progress, we're going to get to kind of like the more open-ended simulations and how they all function. But the benefits to this is that it's scalable, it's easy to deploy and go through these workflows and make mistakes in a safe way without damaging equipment or ruining the customer experience. But the drawback is that you cannot collaborate with others. It's only single player. So you cannot join trainers and trainees. So you lose the aspect of connectivity as you go through this. I see some more questions here. Yes, we'll provide recordings as well. It's hard to some training simulate heat smell. Yes, so that's a very, very good comment. So when it comes to like what these simulations can give us, it's going to be limited to visual and some type of haptic feedback, right? Heat, and things like, let's say, resistance, if you're using a wrench or if you're using tools, is going to be missing. Now, there are accessories that attempt to kind of like address that, but honestly, it just doesn't work very well right now. So when we use VR simulations, we're really focusing on teaching our employees the ability to learn the workflows and make mistakes. But let's say if they're opening a component for Toyota in a forklift, we're not teaching them how to use the Allen key or the wrench, but we're teaching them which bolt to remove and which component to remove in a safe way, and what are the parts inside of it, and what are the workflows. So you will never, well, for the time being, we don't foresee this technology replacing hands-on and real-life training just because of that. There's heat, there's physical feedback that you get when you do the training that this will never fully replace, but it gets you 80 to 90% there. Right? Like that's the key to it, is that when these employees go and deal with this equipment, at least they are familiar with the workflows. Now I will proceed to the next slides. So we have time for a little poll here. So I'm going to pass it on to Avery. Thank you.
Okay, everybody. Yeah, I just launched the poll here. What's your biggest challenge with technical skills training today? So let us know. I'll give you all just a few moments here, and then I will share the results. Okay, about 5 more seconds, and then I'm going to share this with everybody. All right, there are the results.
Oh, very even, very even. some insights on the results I can actually provide here is that keeping the content up to date is definitely a big challenge. Having a vendor that can work with you on that is a key aspect of it, and having trainers that are available. Engaging learners effectively. That's a fantastic one. It just comes down to the tool sets that you're using to support the trainers. Now, I won't talk about that in this presentation because we're focusing on the simulations, but I just like to say that check out our website, because one of the earliest mistakes that we used to make was that we neglected the trainers, the people deploying VR training, and that made it very difficult to engage the learners effectively. I would expected that to have been higher from people who tried VR, to be honest, because it's such a difficult thing to do. So we built systems and tools to actually support the trainers, the learners effectively. But multiplayer, if you have multiplayer, you basically don't even need that tool, because you will be engaging the trainer, the trainee in VR in the shared environment. As for measuring real world impact, I guess the biggest thing with that is the biggest feedback I can give around that is looking at the analytics, but not just at the usage of VR, but benchmarking the changes to user behavior in real life. That's a part companies always forget about, right? They're always looking at like, okay, how are people doing in VR? But they're never looking like to the next step, which is basically how does that carry over into real life workflows? Some of our customers, like Toyota, what they did very, very well was that they would benchmark basically almost like a scientific study. They will see, okay, how are the employees performing who are getting VR training versus the ones who are not, and then kind of like benchmarking the two in safety and operationals. So that's the biggest feedback I can give around measuring real world impact. So I'll proceed past this poll now. Thank you so much for sharing that, Avery. And now we're going to get into multiplayer. So as I promised, we're getting more and more sophisticated with our simulations. And you're seeing more and more green than you're seeing red. Now, don't mistake this as kind of like this being the best vehicle for training all sorts of workflows. It just means it's the most sophisticated tool for training. But the previous tools are just as effective for specific use cases. Now, the reason Toronto Hydro and many of our customers are moving towards multiplayer technical training is that it gives the trainers the ability to be in the same simulation as the trainees. Like, that's a huge change. So it's not just up to the system, up to the computer, right, to guide them through these processes, because they can be very complex and you cannot program everything, right? So having a real person in there guide the session in real time is important. That said, we always maintain single player as an option, because sometimes you may not have connectivity, sometimes a trainer may not be available. So in that case, the module will just run single player, but with the multiplayer component, I'll be able to talk and showcase that in a second. Let me just see if there's a question here. So how do we create? Typically, yes. So yes, photos and videos are a great use. For some customers who are basically OEMs, they'll provide their technical drawings, and those are optimized to run on a standalone VR headset, and then we add workflows around it. But that's it's very similar to game development. Think about it that way. It's just you create 3D assets, environments, and tools and workflows, and then you create the workflows around it. Then we have the multiplayer component, which is basically bringing all these people into a virtual environment together so they can collaborate. And by the way, we're going to go one step beyond this with Siemens, which I'm very excited to share, but I'm not going to spoil that for us yet, okay? And now the audio is choppy, so I'm going to pause the audio. Unfortunately, you will only hear my voice this time. But now here's the biggest difference. Now we have trainees and a trainer. There are different modes for this that can be configured per client specification, but typically we see two main modes. One is trainer guided. The second one is trainer evaluation. Much like single player, if you're listening earlier. The smartwatch system is universal for all our apps, whether it's 360, whether it's multiplayer, or whether it's single player. But this gives the trainees and the trainer the ability to see kind of like where they sit in the process, which step they have to complete and what steps coming up. It also acts as a tool to access additional information. For example, they can see schematics, They can pull up existing photos and videos. They can deal with all sorts of workflows. Now, the Toronto Hydro, the reason they're doing this is that after their initial pilot, they saw that they were able to train their technicians and the tradespeople about 25% faster than they were without virtual reality training. And you'll notice there's a lot of use cases around electrical or around manufacturing, because those jobs are usually very dangerous and the mistakes can be very costly. Also, it's very difficult, if not near impossible, to train people and show them accidents that could happen during these types of workflows, or have them commit this, do these accidents by themselves. So once we get that order to operate, the trainer will be guiding the trainees along the content, and they will be able to talk to each other, see each other. They can see each other's hand movements. And they will be getting their PPEs first. So as you noticed earlier, the interactions are very similar to guided education, but now we have a group of people collaborating. And in some type of training, like the duo training, for example, the way that functions is that now we see all the PPEs reflected on the trainees. And like, for example, if they forget to wear the PPEs, the trainer is right there. They'll tell them, hey, go pick up the PPE. And the great thing about this type of training is that we are not locked down to just voiceovers and visual highlights, but a real person is there to speak to the trainees and teach them about these tools and how they function and all these systems as they learn together as a group. Again, we're always going to see visual inspections all around. It's like, I'd say like 30%, fun enough, of our apps are just visual inspections and lockout tagout, because that takes up so much of any type of workflow. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. And all this work is happening on basically functional digital twins. So we can use tools, as we can see here, and just relating this to the previous question, we're not teaching them, how to use a wrench, right? And the feedback that you get while using a wrench. But we are teaching them those points where those bolts are located, where, the rods are, which panels to remove and in what order. And while the trainer does this, that voiceover that we heard earlier through the computer, the AI, that's disabled. So now there's a real person talking to these people, to the students, and they're collaborating together and they're asking questions, and it's a very engaging way to learn. The great thing about it too is that they don't even have to be in the same location. So for a lot of our training, especially decentralized learning, a trainer will start a session, sometimes even from home in VR, and trainees join from everywhere. And that way we also make this more accessible to more locations. Yeah, that bolt. Good comment, Ricky. Yeah, we're just not focusing on it's more like the workflows, like looking at the visual inspections and using the tools, rather than kind of like how the wrench spins. I'm going to fast forward just to show you something interesting in terms of kind of like the best case of motor skill development that VR can do, and a little bit about the challenge of kind of like doing anything else beyond that. So I'm going to go into the hot stick usage here. So when they pull out, there's a section here. It's a very long application. This is common with our apps, but basically there's a point where they have to remove the fuse. Right here. Now, if they pull the fuse out slowly, it's going to arc flash. So that's not good practice. So that's something that can be simulated in VR, right? If they pull their hand back fast, then we know that we're developing a little bit of some good behavior. But obviously, they're not feeling the weight and they're not feeling the resistance, right? And we'll see it right here. So if they're very slow to pull this, then that's something we're training and we're learning about it. So even the trainer can say, hey, if I go slow here, this is going to arc flash. And you can see the little sparks happening there. But again, we're really focusing on the workflows and the procedures rather than having a feel of what it's like to hold a hot stick or pick up that heavy panel. So I'm going to proceed back into the presentation for us. Now, once the simulation is done, what also happens is that it resets, right? So here's the challenge with it is, especially what we noticed in the early days was that the longer modules that take like 20, 30 minutes, if they're interrupted, then the trainee has to start it all over again. And that sometimes can be frustrating. So what we did, and we're going to get a little bit more sophisticated than we were even before, we went into open-ended simulations. And that's what we're going to see with Siemens next. So now these simulations are persistently online. So now what happens is that a trainer can create a personalized digital training workspace. So they can create a virtual room, set up the tools the way they want them to be, set up the equipment the way they want it to be, create multiple versions of this room that they will provide a pin for trainees to join, and then they can collaborate together with this equipment. It's no longer procedural. It's no longer limited to a specific amount of time or going through from start to finish. It is very much a living, breathing virtual twin of real-life equipment and procedures. Now, there is only one red dot, if you notice in this slide, which is it does require good internet. It doesn't need the best internet, but it does need stable internet, especially for the trainer who's hosting the session. Now, for global clients, we will localize this. So whenever they try, like if Siemens, for example, whenever they start this training, if it's North America, they will choose a North American server. If it's European, they'll choose the European servers and so on. But it's really ideal for hybrid learning because what happens a lot is that a trainee will put on a headset, they will learn with the trainers as a group, then they'll take it off and they can go and do something in real life, or they can look at a presentation, right? They don't have to just like go from start to finish in VR. So it's something we're noticing more and more where companies will use this as a form of hybrid training. We're up for our next. Oh, wait, let me show the video first before we go into the poll. Okay, great. So here we see kind of like the suite of applications available, and we see the rooms. Now, only trainers can create rooms, and a trainer can jump from room to room that they have set up. The trainees will join them in that room immediately. So the trainees will see the rooms that have been assigned to them, and they can join them. I'm just going to skip the little introductory part here. And they can choose all sorts of modules. And different modules will have different types of virtual, persistently online rooms that they can access. This case is focused around crane operator training, which is very sophisticated. In this case, we're looking at a blind lift duo. The reason it's blind lift, and I don't know if we have any crane people on chat, but basically one person is not seeing where the crane is operating, so the next person will be guiding them through that process. I'm just going to fast forward. The biggest difference here is that from what we've seen before is that every lever, every button is kind of like a functioning digital twin of its real life counterpart for the trainer and the trainees that may be in the content. So now we are not tasked with following processes and steps, but now we have an open-ended simulation. What that allows us to do basically is use this equipment much like we would in real life. Again, you cannot feel the pull of a button, but you can visualize which button you're pulling, and we can provide some haptic feedback to guide the user around it. So this user, they have to use this crane effectively to pick up equipment and use move those things around. In this case, they're just like doing some basic controls. And now I'll move it back to the poll for us.
Okay, everyone, here's the poll. What's most important to your organization when evaluating a new training platform? Is it measurable ROI and performance metrics, learner engagement and satisfaction, ease of integration with LMS, or scalability across teams and sites? I'll give you all just a few moments here and then I'll share the results. Okay, about 5 more seconds. We're getting some good responses. And here are those results. Looks like learner engagement and satisfaction is the winner, just by a hair.
Do I have some good news for everyone? It's not in this presentation, unfortunately. So I can help with some of this stuff. So measuring ROI, at the end, you're going to get a link to our website. We have a digital tool that helps you put in input numbers that will measure the ROI for the company. And it can be in the red, like you could lose money. The biggest factor we notice in measuring ROI for companies comes down to sheer number of users. So the more people using VR in your company, the higher the ROI. And of course, you cannot measure ROI unless you understand cost. So the way that tool works is that you basically input the potential cost for creating, deploying, and maintaining the VR, the software and the hardware, and then you input the number of users, whether it's time traveled, whether it's time saved in training, and then you see whether there is ROI or not. And then learner engagement and satisfaction is a fantastic one. One thing we have actually implemented at the end of all of these modules, there's a user satisfaction survey. So users are able to rate the training modules across multiple questions that are custom per customer. And that way we can see what modules are successful, what are not, where we can improve as well. And that goes back for the company that's creating the content and also the company deploying the content. So I'd say implementing surveys within the VR content is going to help you understand learner satisfaction. As for engagement, that comes out of analytics. It's automatic. You're going to be able to see who's going through the training, how long it's taking them, and which steps or where you see the most mistakes. And yes, if you try to integrate with LMSs, it's very, very easy. And scalability, I'm glad those two are pretty low. Awesome. So I'll just continue to the most interesting things before we run out of time. So I think you all kind of saw the high level of VR training. So what are the core learning modalities for multiplayer technical training simulations? There's trainer-led education. So a trainer will start the session and they will guide the trainees, and the trainees can even repeat what the trainer is doing, or they can just observe and learn that way. And then we have the trainer-led evaluation. So now the tasks are assigned and the trainees can complete the task and the trainer is observing them in the virtual environment, of course, and making sure that they don't make mistakes. So those are like the traditional ones, right? Like the ones I showed you with Toronto Hydro, for example. While with Siemens, we saw the more open-ended simulations, right? Where we're going towards an open shared environment that's persistently online, where the trainees and the trainers are not rigidly locked into specific workflows, right? Like they can use the machinery, whether it's a bucket truck, whether it's a crane, whatever have you, they can interface with it much like they would in real life. It's a living, breathing virtual environment that's always online. Well, those are kind of like the three multiplayer modalities from most simple to more complex. And if I move on to my last slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about the future. So where do we go beyond that? I guess like the biggest change we're seeing right now that we're working to implement with some of our key customers, this part I cannot share or talk about yet, but I can tell you about how it functions, is that we're creating persistent interoperable simulations. So like, getting rid of the big words. What that means is that let's say we have one module running that's running a substation, and then we have another module that's running some electrical wires down. These are interconnected. So basically, if somebody makes a mistake in a substation, that's going to carry over to the next module that people are working on. So what that does is it creates more of like a interconnected virtual suite of applications that are always online. So whatever a trainer does somewhere has impact somewhere else across the virtual twin, the persistently virtual twin of the environment. That's kind of like the biggest one. And it takes away the need to restart modules. It does away with the procedural-based learning, and it really creates like a living, breathing virtual world, but not just for one application, but for multiple applications that are interconnected with each other. And that's like the big change that we're seeing right now. So there's cascading events through interlinked modules. That's kind of like the best way to think about it. That actions in one module, I think about it like an environment and a workflow, is going to cause effect in another module for other people that are working through it. And that just means that we can repurpose and use this a lot. So I guess like one of the biggest challenges you will notice with procedural-based learning is that once you do it a couple of times, it's kind of done with, right? Like you can only repeat the Coca-Cola training a few times, and then you should know what you're doing. And that makes it very limited in a sense, right? But if you have an open-ended simulation, you can repeat it endlessly, and you can have endless lessons, and you can have endless learning available through it. How long does it take to create? Fantastic question. It varies, unfortunately, but I would say on average 4 months. The longest is 8 months we've seen. And the 360 stuff usually is done within a month. The reason this is done so fast is because we've developed a very strong software development kit internally that allows us to create these applications in really fast time. The thing that delays development the most, Gerald, is actually the customer waiting for revisions and feedback before we can implement them and send that version back to the customer and have them agree on it. And that brings me to the end of the presentation with a little bit of time to spare for questions. We have about 5 minutes. So yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us and listening to me ramble about simulations. I hope to get some more questions, but if you want to learn more, there's a question around ROI in the presentation. You'll find a link to the ROI calculator. We have, of course, many demo packages. If you have VR headsets, we'd be able to provide those to you, including some multiplayer simulations. And yeah, thank you so much, Avery, and thank you, Training Industry, for having me.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I do see a question here from Jake. Jake is asking, how does the time to perform maintenance changes or content changes within the content compare between like what you would do in VR versus other learning modalities?
Very good question. It just comes back to the change. So if the change in workflow is simple, then it can be done within a day, like, almost immediately. If the change is complex, for example, there is many steps that will change, that can take a little bit longer. In our experience, we typically bundle like with the solution, what we call maintenance and support, and that includes those changes. So clients don't have to worry about making changes over time. But like, I don't know, maybe I'm hurting myself saying this, but like we've never had clients use it. So they pay for it, but very rarely do we see these changes happen for technical training simulations. So it's there for peace of mind, but we rarely see changes happen. Like sometimes a formal change, but it takes like an hour to change, right? Like, from calling it an order to operate or general safety worksheet, they'll call it something else. That takes like minutes to implement and almost no cost.
Awesome. Perfect. Okay, another question here from Jody. Could you see simulations working for sales-related training? If so, what kind would work best?
Yeah, Jody, very good question. Yes, and I'd say the one that would work best would be interactive 360 video training and not CGI. The reason I say that, and I've been doing sales for like 20 years, is that you want to see expressions and you want to see people's behavior in real life. And through avatars and 3D, it's very hard to get away with it. Like just the cost of creating something that hyper realistic would not justify the investment. So having real characters play out scenes could work, especially for a little bit more customer facing sales roles. But if it's like a software selling role or something that can be done virtually, I'd say just don't do VR, just do basic video training, because that best reflects the type of training you have to do anyway.
Great answer. Okay, awesome. Let's see, we have a few more minutes here. Can you talk a little bit about how would one make the case for immersive learning to leadership teams or stakeholders? Do you have any tips?
Yeah, it takes a lot of work. But here's the great thing about it is that I'd say focusing on return on investment is a huge one. Any decision that leadership will make, they're not going to make it because they think it's cool, although sometimes they will, but they'll do it because it'll make a real impact in the business. And I guess the main areas where you can, I suppose, measure whether it's possible or whether it's of value to the business is it addressing a challenge that is very difficult or impossible to be addressed with what you're doing today, right? And then if it does that, then it makes your life a little bit easier. And does it affect enough people? Because if you have like 5 crane operators in your company, what's the point of spending like $100,000 to build a training simulation, right? But if you have hundreds, and they're traveling all over the place to get their training, and you're seeing challenges with safety and kind of like learning with how things are done originally, then yes. So doing a little bit of work, I think, will help you sell it to executives. And it is not a magic bullet. Like I'd also say that this is the type of technology that requires a very specific use case to be successful. But when it does work, it works really well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Roni, so much for your time today. It's been super engaging. I love all the questions that have been coming through. And we are unfortunately all out of time. So with that, I'm going to provide some next steps on how people can join our next session, what's coming up next. But yes, thank you so much, Roni, for your time today. And with that, we are going to be taking about a 15-minute break. And up next, we have Sunil Kumarji joining us from WhatFix for their session, Building a Confident, High-Performing Workforce with Continuous and Hands-On Learning. In just a moment, I will end this session, and you can join our next session by returning to the event lobby and going to the session tab. Hope you all stick around for that session, and we will see you at the top of the hour.